This is your host, Amanda Manier. I am a veteran advocate and the managing attorney at the Veterans Law Group. We're a law firm that has been exclusively representing veterans pursuing their VA disability compensation claims for over 25 years. One of the joys of my job is I get to host this radio show every Tuesday night from 7 to 8 o'clock. We are live this evening, wanting to take your calls to be able to answer questions that you have about your claim, or if you are a family member, we also take those calls too, or friends, any way that you might want to help a veteran in your life who is struggling. That's certainly how I got involved in doing this, so 10, 12 years ago. Is helping a friend who I saw struggling, and I had been working as a business attorney for a number of years. So it was one of those things that I wanted to help him out. So if you're a friend out there of a veteran and want to figure out how you can help support them and get them the help that they need. Unfortunately, the VA is an entire entity that is set up to help veterans, but they are a bureaucracy and there's a lot of red tape, and ultimately sometimes you need to come to a point to hire an attorney to help you kind of navigate that process. We've got a really great team here. I get to work with veterans every single day, not only as clients, but as our team members. And I will happen to mention as well, but before I do, I always forget to give out the number. So we're here live this evening. Our number here is 800-222-5222. That's 800-222-5222 if you want to give us a call. Generally, I'll kind of outline a couple of topics to get us started, but I'm happy to take your calls on any topics related to veterans. As I mentioned, I'm working with most of my staff here are family members of veterans or veterans themselves. We are actually in a hiring process right now. Our business is growing like crazy, and that's a good thing for a lot of people, as far as being able to work here and our business. It's also gives me there's always a little bit of struggle with that, because the idea, I always say that I shouldn't have this job. It should not be necessary for a veteran to hire an attorney to get what they need. But here we are. And again, I said we're growing. And we always give priority to veterans in hiring. If you're a veteran and you're interested in getting into this field, you do not have to have legal experience. Email us at veteransvoice@veteranslaw.com. That's veteransvoice@veterans.law.com. And you're also welcome to use that email if you want to reach out to us off of the air about your claim as well. So we have set that up specially so that we know people who are coming in through this show and who've listened to this show. But again, we're taking your calls live this evening, 800-222-5222, if you would like to talk about your claim. This evening, one of the things that's been bouncing, generally what kind of drives the topics that I'm thinking about is sometimes it's the news. I try not to get too hyped up about the news when things are being talked about possibly happening with veterans. I think that oftentimes veterans get utilized and leveraged, particularly during political times of people, it's almost like they do the same thing with children and teachers and that kind of thing. Politics want to kind of, nobody wants to be against veterans. Everybody wants to help veterans. And if you do something that is not helpful to them, it's definitely detrimental from a political standpoint. So I take everything that's said, especially this time of year, with a little bit of a grain of salt and look at the difference between what might be proposed and what's actually in the works congressionally, and then what actually ultimately gets passed by one house or the other. We're always working in federal law when it comes to VA disability. So a bill that passes the House may not ever pass the Senate, that kind of thing. So if there's things out there that you're paying attention to and you want to talk about of what's going on, I'm more than happy to entertain it for a little while. But generally, I try to give on this show some very concrete educational information, as well as some success stories now and then, and have some guests on now and then who are helping veterans. So tonight, one of the things that been really thinking about over the last week or so, because I've been dealing with it, the VA tends to do a lot of kind of ebb and flow, where I see a lot of the same kind of things over and over again, and then I won't see it for a while. And having worked for the government years ago, I know that tends to be because they see an issue, or the inspector general sees an issue that comes up, writes a report, and so then the VA goes into, or the government in any entity really goes through a time of education. Oh, we need to retrain everybody on this particular subject matter. And then things will kind of get better a little bit sometimes on those subject matters. And then we see sometimes it falls down the wayside, or later it's another issue. So in this circumstances, I've been seeing a lot of issues coming out of the VA on two things. One in particular is secondary conditions. And I think we've talked a little bit on the show before about secondary conditions, but I want to dig into that a little bit. And then also some things with regards to PTSD ratings. Again, we are taking your calls live this evening if you want to jump in on the conversation, 800-222-5222. So when I'm talking about secondary conditions, for those of you who may be new to this subject matter listening in, the very basics of it are a veteran who has an in-service while they were serving in the military, when they were during the time that they were under contract with the military, or if they were in reserves and they were activated and maybe turned overseas, or during training, they incur some sort of injury. So that could be a sprained ankle, a twisted back, and it may be, more mental health things related to combat or a training accident, that kind of thing. So there's something that happens in service. They now, after they're out of service, have some sort of condition. So generically, they call it a disability, but the condition could be a back strain, it could be arthritis, it could be disc degenerative disease, it could be PTSD, anxiety, depression, any of those. So there's a current disability. And the VA determines that that current condition is related to that situation that happened in service, that stressor or that combat or that injury in service. And if they find all of those things, it's A plus B equals C, A plus B, C equals D equals compensation, they will grant a monetary benefit, non-taxable, to the veteran for as long as that disability exists. So many times that's for the remainder of the veteran's life. So those are things in which, again, there's a in-service injury. So when we're talking about secondary conditions, what that is basically whatever that service-connected condition is. So if there's a back-related injury, the VA determines that it's related to service, grants them a percentage, and is paying them a dollar amount. Over time, that back injury may then create other injuries. So it may then, because you're compensating for your back, you walk in a certain way and it starts to affect your feet or your knees or your cervical. And so from an orthopedic standpoint, a lot of, all that stuff is connected. And even though maybe you didn't actually hurt your knees in service, over time, because of that back, your knees develop a condition that would only have developed or would not have developed other than you had that lower back injury. So that then becomes also service-connected, or can become service-connected, and also be a part of what your month-to-month compensation is. So some of the things that also comes in, so that's probably the basics, of orthopedics is the most common one, because like I said, the body kind of all works together. So if you got a messed up knee and you're favoring it, it might mess up your hip, things like that. But some of the kind of out of the box things that we think about when we're representing veterans is what other kind of secondary conditions might be developed. And if you think about just from your, healthcare, what kind of medication are you on in order to support a service-connected disability? Like one of the most commons with an orthopedic condition is pain medication, ibuprofen, things like those. Ibuprofen may then cause stomach issues or liver issues. So if over time, because you're taking a medication for your service-connected disability and you develop another injury, a stomach condition, a liver condition, then you can apply for that to be recognized by the VA as a service-related condition. The other one that is relatively new, I would say, 5-6 years at least, is looking at things that if you have a medication or a condition that causes a weight gain, that then causes another condition such as sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is very well known as being caused by weight gain. And if you have weight gain due to a medication or due to even sometimes you have a multiple orthopedic issues, and because of that you can't exercise or you have problems with that, and your weight gain is related to that, you can possibly pursue sleep apnea. So it's not for like a one and done kind of idea where you get out of the military. And if you're in the military listening right now, I would love to talk to you if you're getting ready to get out and you would like some advice on how to handle that. I'm happy to talk to you on this show as well. Again, our number here is 800-222-5222. I work with a lot of organizations that are helping military in transition and helping them to kind of line up when you get out. Why should you file and how should you file? What should you put on the record? That kind of thing. But going up back to the secondary conditions over time, it's not just you file your claim when you get out of the military, you get rated for everything and you're done. Over time, typically orthopedic issues don't necessarily get better. They get worse over time as aging happens. And then always to think about some of these secondary conditions that come in to certainly consider as you're going down the road. Now, one of the big questions I get all the time is, well, should I file this? Should I file this? If you've already reached your 100%, filing those other claims may not make any difference, but they also may. So certainly reach out to an organization like ours or the veteran or a veteran service officer in your area who can help you decide whether or not it's worth filing these secondary conditions. So we're going to take a break. When we come back, if you would like to talk about your claim, if you have any questions about the secondary conditions, give us a call at 800-222-5222. This is Amanda with the Veterans Voice. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You are listening to the Veterans Voice. This is your host, Amanda Manier. I am a veteran advocate and attorney at the Veterans Law Group. And we've been talking this evening about, we're always every Tuesday night talking about VA disability claims, but most this evening kind of focusing on secondary conditions and how you can kind of maybe always be conscious of those as you move on through your life as a veteran and as we all do get older, and different things that can come up because of your service related conditions. We are taking your calls live this evening at 800-222-5222 if you'd like to talk about this topic, or if you just have a question about your VA disability claim, or you're in the military and you're wondering kind of how to even start this process, or what's the best advice that I can give you. I can give completely unsolicited advice, but I like when it's solicited as well. So give us a call at 800-222-5222. Lieutenant Colonel Martin, welcome back to the show.
Hello, how you doing again? Wanted again to say thanks for the technical proficiency and expertise helping us veterans. I really wanted to give a shout out to the Army Reserve. The 79th Theater Sustainment Command is the second largest reserve command in the United States right here in Orange County, and a lot of veterans listen to you and your program. Piggybacking on secondary claims, what you were talking about, Daryl with Veterans Voice out of Long Beach Health Center, we were just talking about this day before yesterday. And so what about, like you said, if you're 100% and you later on you get worse and you're already permanent and total, let's just say, 10 years later or whatever, would it be to the benefit of the veteran to claim additional disabilities for maybe special aid and attendance or housebound later on? Okay, and I wanted to thank you very much, and I'll just hang up and listen to your expert guidance. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. So, I hate to put it this way. It's one of the most common answers you'll ever get from an attorney, and I hate it as well. But the answer is it depends. It definitely depends upon what the condition is and whether or not it would fall within either, as you mentioned, an aid and attendance environment, a special monthly compensation based upon your ratings, or the other thing that comes up. So let me back up on those two. Aid and attendance is typically one of those situations in which the veteran has gotten to a point where they can't manage their day-to-day activities, such as maybe dressing themselves or feeding themselves or taking care of themselves. And so they need somebody else to assist them with that. And if you're already 100% permanent in total and maybe you haven't reached that point, but ultimately you do, then that's a separate application and it's a separate benefit that you'll get an additional compensation to pay for somebody who can come into your home and help you within your home. It is a medical decision, as most of these things. It's an application you file, and you need doctors to fill out the form. Especially if you have a private doctor, they do it so much better as far as saying what you need. So there's that additional condition. There's also if you ultimately end up having like one condition that has you at 100% and another condition at least 60, there is a special monthly compensation, meaning you get an additional couple $100 a month, even if you're already maxed out at 100%. So that's another situation. And then the third one that we deal with a lot is if it could be a condition that you could ultimately pass away from. So you may be 100% for PTSD and unemployability, but maybe you had some sort of head injury that could result in dementia later. There's a commonality between that. And if it's something that you could, or you develop a cancer condition or something like that, if you're, within that 10-year period of time where you haven't had your 100% permanent total for a 10-year period of time, it's worth filing that claim, even though it doesn't give you personally any additional monthly compensation, or it may not. It may open up the ability for your dependents, your spouse, if you have dependent parents or helpless children, that kind of thing, to be able to get a benefit after you're gone. So it's kind of a little bit of analysis of if you are 100% permanent in total, there still might be a question as to whether or not you should file a secondary condition or a new condition that develops. So with this PACT Act that has recently been passed, many of the things that are related to burn pits are cancer related. So kind of going back to my analysis of if you're 100% for PTSD, but you end up with one of those cancers, it might be worth filing just so it's service connected and your family might get some benefit out of it. So those are a couple things to consider. I hope that that's helpful. Again, we're here live this evening taking your calls, 800-222-5222, talking about VA disability benefits, how to navigate that process, what's the best thing to approach. With those secondary conditions, one of the things that I will tell you is that you do need to claim them as secondary conditions. So when you fill out one of the forms with the VA, it's probably one of the biggest mistakes I see on the veteran side is they go in and they file that claim. We were talking about a back injury maybe causing a knee injury because you're favoring one side or the other, maybe a sciatica. And if you don't go in and claim that knee injury is a secondary condition, you just claim the knee injury, the VA will probably reject your claim without even an exam, because all they're going to look at is, did he have a knee injury in service? And if he didn't, then they're just going to deny it. So it's important to claim on the form and when you submit it that you're claiming it as a secondary condition. I see that all the time with sleep apnea, that 20 years later, they're filing a claim for sleep apnea and the VA just flat out denies it because there was no complaints in service, no diagnosis in service, and no complaints in service of sleep issues. When really, when you're looking at it from an advocate standpoint, that sleep apnea is claimed as a secondary condition due to weight gain. So there are many, many, many other secondary conditions. I just want to kind of raise the issue. If you have one that you might consider or you might want some advice on, again, you can feel free to call us here, or if during off time when we're not here on Tuesday night, or you just don't want to necessarily talk on live air about your disability, you can always email us at veteransvoice@veteranslaw.com. Okay, the other thing I wanted to get into, I got a decision today for a client, and I'll get into this a little bit before our 7:30 break, but we got a decision from a client that we have been representing since 2014, and they finally got it right. And I just wanted to kind of talk through that a little bit for any of you out there who are struggling with dealing with the VA, or maybe you have a representative and you're struggling with feeling like they're not doing everything that they can. This case is dear to my heart because this is, as a representative, you certainly have veterans that stick out with you. This one in particular, I've handled almost all of his hearings, and he's just all around a good guy, and he finally got his case granted. But I wanted to walk through, without giving any personal information about him, but I wanted to walk through a little bit about kind of what happened in his case so you can get an idea for two things. For the general public who might be listening, to get an idea of what veterans go through as they're struggling and fighting with the VA. And again, I know that not every single client, not every veteran struggles this much with the VA, but this is somebody who unfortunately was, he was supporting, he was working with his symptoms. He was trying to do the best he could by supporting his family and taking care of his kids. But ultimately came to a point that his PTSD symptoms rose to the condition of which he couldn't work anymore. But in looking back and talking with him very frankly, he had many of these symptoms all along, and that's why we kept fighting. And what often happens with the VA is, so in this guy's condition, I'll get into it a little bit more, but he initially came to us and he had a 30% rating for his PTSD. But in just talking with him, where he felt comfortable talking with us, and again, because he was being interviewed by a veteran who had gone through the very same thing in our office, and he was very much more open with what his symptoms were, which we identified as should have been at a 70% rating, and that was in 2014. And he had filed his claim in 2011 prior to coming to us and had tried to work his claim on his own, and kind of came to a point that all they were giving him was 30% for his PTSD, and he was struggling with holding down a job. He was working, but he was struggling. And so what I want to kind of go through a little bit, and I'll do a little bit before the break here, is when you're looking at any psychological related condition. So the VA looks at all diagnoses the same in the sense that they rate you based upon your symptoms. And so whether you have PTSD, anxiety, depression, whatever even bipolar and schizophrenia, they will get your diagnosis if it's related to service. And after that, all they're looking at are the symptoms that are listed in the statute, which is one of my biggest frustrations. And one of the things that I would love to see changed is for them to change the symptoms related to, a bipolar condition is very different from an anxiety and very different from depression, very different from schizophrenia. And so you have to kind of fit yourself within this box that the VA has created for the symptoms that they then determine to be giving you a 30, a 50, a 70%. So I'll talk a little bit more on this case when we come back, but I'm also going to relate to another case study who's another client of mine who's very near and dear to me, who we fought his case. He finally won it after 20 years. We handled it for 12, and he was a schizophrenia, and he was non-service connected to begin with. And ultimately we got him service connected, and then the VA does these little, well, we'll give him 30%, and then we'll give him 50, and then and it's just, how do you approach that? How do you convince and show the VA what they need to see? And that's part of our job as a representative. We're up against a hard break. We're going to come back in a minute, and I'm going to walk through some of these symptoms and how you can show those things. So we'll be right back. This is Amanda Manier with the Veterans Voice. Good evening. Welcome back. This is Amanda Manier with the Veterans Voice. We are talking this evening about VA disability claims, as we do every Tuesday evening from 7 to 8 o'clock. As an attorney and a veteran advocate, I've worked in this industry for about 12 years, and our firm over 25 years, since 1996. And that's all we do. And it's one of the joys of my job is I get to host the show and answer your questions and help do. I mean, I'm a teacher at heart. I'm not a lecturer or presenter, and typically not and definitely not a court lawyer. But I do love to teach, and I love to help veterans and their families, and additionally the general public, and understand what this process is like, not only from a legal aspect, but also a practical aspect. And if you listen to this show before, maybe one of our podcasts, it's, I always look at my job is to help the VA. It's a non-adversarial process according to the law, which means it's not us against the VA. The VA shouldn't be advocating against granting the veteran the benefits. It's all of us together are working together to get the veteran what they can possibly get under the law. But again, as a representative, my job is to make it super easy for the VA to grant the claim, put all the ducks in a row. And that not only works well for the veteran to get what they need, but it also creates a good relationship between us and the VA, where a decision maker and adjudicator, if they see our power of attorney, that's also something I'm very proud of, is that they see our power of attorney on a case and they're like, oh, there's something to this case. Because we only take cases that we 100% believe in, and we're going to make it easy for the VA. So not only is there something to it, but they're going to make it easy for me to grant the case. So we try to make the VA employees have a job that's easier if they work with us. Before the break, we are taking our calls live this evening, so if you'd like to jump in, whether on this conversation or you've got a question specifically about your claim or somebody in your family or friends, 800-222-5222 is our number here. You can reach out to us and I will take you live here on the call. If you don't want to talk maybe live on the air, but you'd like to talk about your claim, we set up an email address. It's veteransvoice@veteranslaw.com. So our website for the law firm is veteranslaw.com. So if you just veteransvoice@veteranslaw.com, we'll be happy to help you. Before we went into the break, we were talking about a case study of a client's case that came in today that I'm super excited about. It's all PTSD related. I was talking in general about all of the mental health conditions that are rated by the VA. They're all rated the same way, and they all have the same symptoms that drive that particular rating, whether it's anxiety, depression, adjustment disorder, bipolar, schizophrenia, any of those things. It's all kind of lumped into one thing, and you can only be rated for one mental health condition. So even if you have multiple ones, you can only be rated for one. So the things I want to kind of go through is the rating scale. If you go to our website, veteranslaw.com, this is something that's downloadable off of our website, is a rating schedule. But essentially, it's the VA just kind of going from the bottom up. They're going to grant you a 0%. So if they decide that your mental health condition is related to your service, then they have to give it a percentage rating. And sometimes they will give, it's rare that I've seen a 0%, but a 0% essentially says, we believe this condition exists with you, however, meaning you've been formally diagnosed, but symptoms are not severe enough to interfere with occupational and social functioning to require continuous medication. So this is something that a lot of people out there who get a diagnosis, they get diagnosed and they get given medication, but I'm very understandable that a lot of veterans don't like to take mental health medication, but I'll get to that in a minute. But this is where essentially they're not even offering you medication for your depression or your adjustment disorder or anything like that. It is 0%. Then the VA will go to a 10% rating if essentially you have mild or transient symptoms, meaning they come and go, and they're often managed by medication. So if you have medication that tends to kind of help it and make it quote unquote go away from the VA's perspective, they'll give you a 10% rating. So those are the basic ones. Then it goes up to a 30%. So there is no 20 in a mental health. 30% is where the VA is saying that occupational and social impairment with occasional decrease in work efficiency and intermittent periods of inability to perform occupational tasks or routine behavior or social things. So basically they're kind of saying your symptoms kind of come and go. You come and go. So what kind of, gives me a little sarcasm and I get a little frustrated with that is that's a lot of people that struggle with bipolar. It comes and goes. That's kind of the definition of bipolar. And I don't think that it's fair necessarily for them to drop you in a 30% just for that. But I'm going to keep my commentary limited. 30% is that you have, so symptoms include things like a depressed mood, you have some anxiety, you have panic attacks, but they're weekly or less often than weekly. You might have some chronic, well, they call it chronic sleep impairment and mild memory loss. So again, if you think about that as the VA granting a 30% rating, which is very low, they're acknowledging that you have panic attacks on once a week and chronic sleep impairment, depression and anxiety, and it affects your ability to work. It has occasionally, not all the time, but occasionally decrease in work efficiency. And they're only granting you a 30% with that. 50% is occupational and social impairment with reduced reliability and productivity. So that's a little bit higher. So they're going to look at things like panic attacks more than once a week, difficulty in understanding complex commands, impaired judgment, impaired abstract thinking, disturbances in motivation and mood. And you're going to see the difference between these things when I go up to 70. And then a difficulty in establishing, maintaining effective relationships. So get difficulty, but not inability. So most of the people that I've seen that float within a 50%, they are maybe struggling day to day, but they're able to maintain a job, even if it's rough. 70%, once you reach the 70%, it's basically affecting your ability to maintain a occupational job, so maintain a job and also maintain a social interactions. So, and then we're looking at inability to establish effective relationships, establish and maintain, where 50% we're looking at there's some difficulty than that. 70% also includes difficulty in establishing distressful circumstances, including work or personal. 70% also jumps into where you might neglect your personal hygiene at times, like you wouldn't necessarily take a shower or do what you need to do if you didn't have to leave the house and for days on end. And then the biggest one within the 70%, and there's some other near continuous panic or depression. I don't want to get too much into the legalese, but the biggest one that probably jumps you in from a 50 to a 70%, even if it's the only symptom that you have in the 70%, is a suicide ideation. And that one's hard to talk about, and that's completely okay. But one of the things that I see in kind of reflecting back to the case study I was telling you about this client that his case finally came through, which they gave him. He was just to acknowledge him a little bit, he was U.S. Army veteran, served from 2006 to 2011, did service in Iraq and Afghanistan, both combat action badge, Iraq campaign medal, Afghanistan campaign medal. Originally filed his claim back in 2011, and they gave him 30%. So once their case is done, which we just, we'll finish it up here, he finally got, he's getting that 70% back to 2011. And then 100% under unemployability once he stopped working, which he eventually did end up getting to a point that he couldn't work. So there is also a 100% rating for these mental health conditions, and that's where they're coming with the VA saying you have a total occupational and social impairment. And that's going to include things where, like, you have hallucinations, delusions, you might be a persistent danger to yourself or others, inability to perform daily activities, including maybe cooking for yourself, some of that personal hygiene that we were talking about. So none of this is really fun conversation to talk about, but it's, as I tell my veterans and our clients all the time, when you go into those CNP exams or you go into a hearing, it's the time to be brutally honest about how it is on your worst day. Like, you have to remember that you're essentially asking the VA for help. And if you're not telling them the condition in which you're living or how it is on your worst day, then even as hard as it is to talk about it, then the VA is going to do like they did in this client's case and grant him 30%, because he wasn't honest with them, and he didn't, it's hard to talk bad about yourself and say this is what's happening. So we often help support, spouses that will come in and give testimony and say, look, he's kind of sugarcoating it a little bit, or a spouse can see those symptoms that maybe you can't see for yourself. So I wanted to kind of walk through that a little bit. I know that we're up against a break, but if you want to give us a call, you're welcome to join us. We're taking your calls live, 800-222-5222 if you got a question about any of those conditions or anything else related to your VA claim. We'll be right back. Good evening. Welcome back. This is Amanda with the Veterans Voice. We have been chatting this evening about a couple of topics, secondary conditions, and I was going through kind of mental health ratings and talking a little bit about a case that came through today that I've worked on. He's been a client of ours since 2014. That is not common, I will say, in the sense of that it takes that long to get a claim through. This was a situation in which he came to us with a 30% rating, and then the VA gave him 50, and then, you appeal that, and then we do an independent medical exam, which I'll kind of close our last segment here talking about those. And then he was denied his unemployability because he was on disability leave from his job. So his job kept reporting to the VA that he was still employed, but he had been out on disability leave for about a year and a half. So and that's part of what I use the word all the time when I'm talking about working with the VA, of it's navigating this process. And, how do you get the right information to the right people? And then sometimes you get the right information to the right people and they don't read it right, or they don't read it at all. That's certainly one of those things that happens more often than I even hate to admit. But I will touch on the last couple things, but if you're a veteran who's listening or a family member listening, we are live this evening, and I'm happy to take your call, a question about your claim if you have one. 800-222-5222. I'm, again, happy to take your call. So one of the things in which was key in this case that I was referring to, again, a U.S. Army veteran, served from 2006 to 2011, did tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, has combat medals for both of those, obviously, and came back, and his initial rating was at a 30%, which, as we mentioned, a 30% is occasional decreases in work efficiency. So the symptoms related to those occasional things are depression, anxiety, panic attacks weekly, chronic sleep impairment, mild memory loss, and they consider that a mild interference with your daily life or your ability to work. One of the key things, if you've heard, most of you probably have if you're a veteran, something called independent medical examinations. So when a veteran has a claim that they file with the VA, and the VA sees that they had some sort of injury or stressor in service, or there's something that kind of triggers, there's a whole list of things that triggers the requirement for the VA to schedule an exam. When you file a claim for a disability as a veteran, you don't have to already have a diagnosis. The VA is responsible for sending you to a doctor to get a diagnosis. So if you're like, oh, my back hurts and I had a back injury in service, but I don't know if it's arthritis or disc degenerative disease or, any of those things, they were required under what's called a duty to assist to send you to an examination. That's usually with either one of their internal doctors at the VA Medical Center, or more likely than not, these days it's going to be a private contractor through organizations like QTC, LHI. They're outside doctors that the VA pays to do these examinations. And there's a standard questionnaire that the examiner has to go through, and they issue an opinion. Do they think it's related to service? What's your diagnosis? And how severe it is? Those are the key things that examination is going to do. So that examination may be in your favor or not in your favor. And what you have the right to do and have the ability to do is to, one, you can have that same questionnaire filled out by your own maybe practicing doctor or your treatment doctor, Or there are many organizations out there, many doctors out there that are doing independent examinations that are very pro-veteran. So there's a couple of things related. One, it's going to be out-of-pocket money unless you're working with an organization like ours, and we pay the out-of-pocket. And they're paid essentially for their time to dig in a lot deeper than maybe. So if you think about it from a perspective of one of these contractors, the VA is likely paying them some sort of flat fee to do it, and so it's going to be, it doesn't behoove them to spend additional time to dig into your case. But an independent examiner, they're usually paid for their time, and we pay ours for their time to dig in a little bit deeper into your case, to spend more time with you. I've heard over and over again mental health examinations that are taking. You go in to get them, and you're in the doctor's office for 15 to 20 minutes, and then the examiner is issuing a diagnosis for you. So just keep in mind that those independent examiners are typically going to spend a little time. In addition to that, when you work in work with our organization, we've trained these doctors to write for the way that the VA needs to grant your case. Again, going back to that A plus B equals C, putting all the ducks in a row. So we teach them how to utilize the VA's language, the things that you guys all probably know. It's more likely than not that his condition is related to service. They're going to go through, just like I did on those symptoms list, and identify which symptoms that you have and how that affects your day-to-day ability to work, to be in social environments, and and how it affects you before you were in service and had this incident while you were in service, or before you were deployed and were in combat, and then afterwards. And so utilizing independent medical experts is incredibly important, at least internally for us. But it also is most of the time a game changer. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I just want to touch really quickly. If you want to give us a call, 800-222-5222. You probably hear my dear sweet dog barking in the background. She is our office mascot here and a service and support dog. And she shows up on these radio shows now and then. Again, our number here is 800-222-5222. And as I mentioned before, you can always email us at veteransvoice@veteranslaw.com. Just going back quickly to this case study that I was telling you about, I mentioned, but I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper. So he was ultimately given a 70%, but it wasn't the right effective date. And I'm always looking at when should be the proper effective date, because in some situations, it's the condition worsens over time. So, and that's how the VA was looking at it. They looked at when we first examined him, his conditions met a 30%. And then after several years from the appeal, because it used to definitely take that long and it's getting worse again, but he would be re-examined and it's okay, now he's showing conditions of a higher percentage. Then he came to us and we talked to him about his conditions, and we're like, okay, you need to tell the examiner that you have, these higher conditions that you're telling us you have. And, supporting him through that process of, I know tomorrow's going to be a hard conversation with the examiner. I know it's somebody that you've never met before. And it's not easy to walk into a room with somebody you've never met before and spill your guts, especially as a veteran who is somebody who served with honor, who was taught to be brave, who was taught to stand up for his battle buddies and do all of that kind of thing, to walk in and then be able to just kind of dump their heart out on the table about how messed up their life is. And so being keenly aware of that and working with the veteran through that process is, again, part of my responsibility in helping a veteran navigate all of that. So I don't want to talk too much longer on this, but I do want to take a call here. We have a call here from Daryl in Stanton. Daryl, welcome to the Veterans Voice.
Hello, thank you. Just kind of all this you've been going through here and things you're talking about, the examinations and things like that. Just to let you know, I'm Daryl, friend of Lieutenant Mike Martin. Anyway, when I first went to the VA, which was years after I'm a Vietnam veteran, and years after, and I got rated at 80% right off the bat, just going in and not really having many interviews or anything like that. They just diagnosed me, and they wanted to put me on medication right away, said I was depressed and all on and on and on. And I really didn't know what was going on because I was brand new to this, but I went through that. But later on, then I filed for my unemployability, and I got that pretty easy, too. I didn't have any problems. But since I've been out of the military, they have found more issues wrong with me. Like number one, my spine is messed up, and I also have black marks and some kind of shields in the front of my brain and things like that. And even on my records, it showed due to traumatic event, but they won't recognize it because they can't determine that it was something that happened to me in Vietnam. And I went to another interview. And like I said, they had this young girl. I don't think she's ever really interviewed anybody before, but her main question is if I make my bed and give me a story, and that was about it. And after I got my results back, they was just saying that 0, deny. And also the doctor I went to, he wanted to know who wrote my claim, and I told him I wrote my claim. And I said, what difference does that make to you?
Right. It shouldn't. Okay, so when I sit down and look at a denied claim, I'll tell you this. I'm going to first pull. Thank you for Daryl, and I hope that it worked out. And I just want to jump in because I know we're going to up against the end of the show, and I want to say a couple things here. Is one, those are the type of conditions in which I was telling you that even if you are 100% under TDIU, might be worth going ahead and filing for. And it's walking into the examiner. This is why working with a good veteran service officer or a good representative like our office is going to help you with, okay, when you go into that examination, we don't know what we're walking into, right? You don't know if you're going to, I mean, I had somebody the other day going for a sleep apnea claim, and it was a gynecologist. So being able to know what you need to tell them, regardless of whether they ask you or not, is key when it comes to having a representative. So Daryl, you're welcome to call back next week or in the future. I'm happy to talk with you more about your claim. Unfortunately, we're up against a hard break, and I got to cut it for the day. But we'll be back next Tuesday, 7 to 8 o'clock here on 790 KABC. This is Amanda Manier with the Veterans Voice. We'll see you next week.